I'm Jeff Lenz with the Office of Research Compliance here at Rowan's IRB, and I'm going to talk to you today about the workshop that we've had throughout this month of June 2018 that are covering the upcoming changes to the final rule as it relates to human subjects research. Specifically, there's going to be two policies that are going to be implemented starting July 1, 2018. The implementation of progress reports for certain types of expedited level studies, and we're also going to speak about the new upcoming pedagogical and methodological activities policy that will also be coming online starting July 1. Before we get started about actually covering the details of these new upcoming changes, though I always like to emphasize why we here at the Office of Research Compliance and the IRB exist, and why we ask you to submit your proposals for human subjects research to us whenever you wish to conduct your research. So it kind of goes without saying, but we want to make sure that we have the best interest in mind for not only us as researchers and at the institution, but more importantly, our participants, our subjects that are giving their time and sometimes their efforts and all those sorts of other things to give us that research data. And it kind of falls not only on to us as the IRB, not only you as the primary researcher, but all of us kind of collectively together, including the institution and the subjects, to make sure that those fundamental rights are upheld at all times throughout the research process. So it's our responsibility, it's the researcher's responsibility, it's the IRB's responsibility, and the university's as well. And with that, we have all sorts of kind of background as to why we have these fundamental rights and outlining what these fundamental rights are, including but not limited to things like federal policies and laws, like the common rule that we're going to discuss a little bit today, our own university policies and basic ethical principles, including the cornerstone of human subjects research, the Belmont Principle. So for those of you who might have not heard, there's been a lot of upcoming changes to the federal regulations that lay out kind of the protections and responsibilities of the researchers and institutions when it comes to human subjects research. And what we call is the common rule, or 45 CFR Part 46. That's that federal regulation that we're talking about that is also in the midst of potentially being changed. Before we talk about the changes, we'll just summarize really quickly what the common rule is and why it exists. So it was founded based off of the Belmont Principles, which hopefully all of you researchers should know what those are. If not, please look them up. It's essential to actually conducting research in an ethical manner. But with those three principles at heart, the common rule set up kind of best practices and actual regulations established by the federal government to protect human subjects during research activity. And they call it the common rule because it's accepted by just about all of the federal departments and agencies. And all of those different agencies do have different names for this law, so they just kept it simple and call it the common rule to catch all of those different CFR numbers. And the thing that's shared amongst all of our federal departments and agencies at the government level is Subpart A, which defines basically what human subjects research is, gives us the definition of types of categories of research, including exempt and expedited, along with our full board studies, and gives us a concept of what we would consider a minimal risk in terms of collecting research data from our human subjects. And also basically lays out what the institutional review board is, how it works, how it's functioning, what it can do and what it cannot, and also sets up the requirements for things like informed consent and other procedures for conducting research. So the nuts and bolts of what our IRB is and how it exists and how it actually carries out its work is defined by the Subpart A of the common rule. And there's been a couple of different announcements from federal regulations basically outlining, along with NPRMs, kind of eliciting comments from the public about these changes to this federal regulation. And if you've been following the news, there's been a little ups and downs as to actually when those new changes are going to be implemented or if they're going to be implemented at all. So the updates as of June 2018 are this. So all of the changes planned for those new common rule, which was deemed the final rule, was supposed to come into effect this January, but obviously we did not have it set this year, and there's now been final confirmation that this delay of the new final rule regulations, including changes to things like exempt and expedited categories, continuing review policies, definitions of what research is and is not, along with things like broad consent for collecting biospecimens for secondary purposes, or private health information for that matter. All of these planned changes are, as of today, set to be coming into effect January 21st, 2019. And with that, they also asked for new kind of comments to see if that delay was sufficient, or even if there was further delay, or even completely reworking of the regulations as well. So we're very much still in the air. Those of us at Rowan's Office of Research Compliance are planning to be prepared for the implementation of the full changes starting this upcoming January, but there's also an expectation that that might be delayed even further still. But the good news, and why we actually are talking today about changes and actually going to give you a little bit of insight as to how those changes are going to affect you in your research lives, the kind of final release that delayed these new changes also allowed for a few provisions of the final rule to be implemented starting this July 2018. And they did this for a specific purpose to kind of allow for some things that didn't really have that much alteration or heavy burden on, say, the administrations or universities and institutions to implement, but also gave a lot of assistance in streamlining and kind of hopefully making the process for researchers and actually on kind of the submission side of the IRB to make it a little bit simplistic and easier moving forward. And what that provision that they are allowing to implement starting this July is going to be a more streamlined annual report process for specific types of expedited research. And our IRB and our Office of Research Compliance had a subcommittee meetings along with faculty members and members of both of the IRBs here at Rowan. We made this determination that this streamlined annual review process that is being allowed through these provisions of the new final rule are going to be instituted as progress reports. So that's what we're going to talk about for the first half of this workshop today, is basically what these progress reports are, how they're going to affect you in your kind of research, and how you can actually submit the progress reports and when you will be required to do so. Though to note all of those other changes, so say changes to the expedited and exempt categories, the biospecimen and private health secondary data collection, and broad consent procedures all are not effective until January 21st, 2019. So just to summarize what we're going to be talking about, these changes that are coming live as of July 1 are going to be the implementation of the progress reports, and also secondarily, kind of unrelated to the final rule, but kind of a need that our office and our IRBs have found, is we're going to be implementing a new pedagogy and methodological policies, a policy for non-research classroom activities moving forward as well. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Right, so the good news, this is kind of great news really for hopefully both you as a researcher and for us as an administration, but we're going to be able to implement progress reports for new studies moving forward starting July 1st. So a progress report is going to be largely in the expedited categories. This isn't going to be for full board reviews, and this isn't going to be for exempts, because exempt studies didn't require annual reports to begin with. But for those types of expedited studies that have been determined by the IRB during the initial review, we'll be allowed to use a simplified progress report for the annual report sent to IRB before that expiration of that study. And the good news is these progress reports will be very much an expedited procedure compared to our current continuing review procedure we have in place now. Those progress reports are going to consist of an abbreviated list of 8 questions about the study, and it will be quickly reviewed administratively by our IRB office. So it's going to reduce the burden time for both you as a researcher to fill out basically a simple form in their EIRB, or a form separate that you upload into the EIRB and then click submit. And the time for review obviously will be shortened as well, because it will only be a single form to be reviewed administratively at our office. So just to summarize this, before, these progress reports are going to be a simplistic form. It's just going to ask for you to provide a summary, and we'll go over exactly what that form will look like in this workshop as well. And that will allow you to submit for reapproval of the study or continuing approval of the study for another calendar year. As I mentioned before, this is going to be mostly a determination made by the IRB reviewer or reviewers at the beginning when you submit your initial study, whether or not this study is going to be requesting a progress report, or if it's going to use the older continuing review, that longer version of the annual report, during that re-review process. And our continuing review process will remain unchanged. But we anticipate just about 70% of our current types of expedited studies coming in are going to qualify for these new progress reports. And those two requirements to qualify for progress reports are just going to be if the study is minimal risk, which should be just about every expedited study. Because again, if you have a study that's not minimal risk, you likely will elevate into the full board review category. So just about every expedited study should hopefully fit that first category. But then the second requirement is going to be that there's no collection of private health information, or PHI. We require, moving forward, reading the final rule regulations and other regulations as well, that studies that are collecting private health information still fall under HIPAA considerations that require a little bit more extensive annual reporting and review process. So we're going to maintain our continuing review process, which collects all of that information required for HIPAA for any PHI-related studies. But again, if your study is not using any or collecting any private health information and it's minimal risk, you likely will fall into the progress report type moving forward, as determined by the IRB member during their initial review. A thing to note here as well is that we're also in the process of training our IRB members in reviewing expedited studies to determine whether or not a progress report or a continuing review is warranted. And a good thing to note is there's going to be justification required for any type of expedited study that is requesting a continuing review. And it will be the discretion of the IRB member whether or not they feel that there might be other considerations, say like sensitive populations or any other types of kind of potentially borderline minimal risk or not, slightly above minimal risk parts of your study, they can request a continuing review. But they need to provide justification as documented in their review process why that is the case. So just be aware of that there could still be, if you fit these two requirements, the IRB reviewer, as in any case, has the authority to dictate what type of review they would like to see for the expiration, the following calendar year. And also to note, just kind of as a reminder, these 2 points at the bottom, exempt studies will not require any of these progress or continuing reviews, right? Because if they're exempt, we don't ask for any annual yearly reports. We only require, as always, that all studies need to be closed out via the final report. So just as a reminder, for all studies you have, exempt, expedited, or full board, once you're complete with all of your data collection and your data analysis, be sure to log into EIRB and submit that final report to close out your study to make sure that we know at the IRB level, oh, okay, this study has now been completed. So now to the nuts and bolts. So how actually you as a researcher, say moving forward after submitting a study for review after this July 1st, how are you going to know whether or not you require a progress report or continuing review? So the good news is we're going to have it very simplistically laid out in your approval letter. So as you can see highlighted here in yellow, the continuation review required is going to be a new field added to all approval letters, as well as those kind of automatic emails you get from the EIRB system during approval that will tell you exactly what type of annual report will be required. So in this case, for this example study, you can see here that progress report has been indicated here. So for this study, after it's been approved, the IRB member made the determination that a progress report will be required. So when you come to the expiration date, in this case it's shown as January 18th, 2019. So when you submit that annual report starting in December of this year, you're going to be selecting the progress report option moving forward within EIRB. So let's take a look at actually what that looks like in EIRB once you are ready to submit that new expiration report. So here we have our updated, and this is going to be updated as of July 1 in our actual live EIRB site. You'll, just as before, be able to click from your home page the Generate Continuing Review button, and then at the top it'll actually say Continuing Review, Final Report, or Progress Report. So it's now even highlighting that there's 3 options for you now instead of the 2. And then it will bring you to this first page as before, where you wanted to select the type of report you wanted to submit. So as is before, you could have used this drop-down menu and actually selected either Continuing Review or Final Report, but there's now the third option for a Progress Report. And the good news is we've made it even more simplistic for you. So if you forgot, from the previous year, looking at your approval letter or that email, or if you don't know how to find that approval letter in EIRB or don't want to bother to look, it's right there for you. So right above the type of report for either continuing review, final report, or progress report, if you want to continue the study, it will tell you right above whether or not the progress report or the continuing review is the one required for your specific study. And to make it even more foolproof, we've actually made sure that if you select the wrong type of report, so if you are required to submit a progress report and you accidentally click the continuing review, we'll have an error message on the next page informing you to make sure to go back and select the proper report requested here at the top. So good news, you can make sure even if students are, say, generating this on your behalf, or say for those graduate students, it will very clearly outline and make sure they select and submit the correct report for your study. So let's follow through here with, say, this type of review that's now a progress report for that annual review. So when you click on the next page, this is all that will be required of you. You'll have a section to upload the progress report, which again is a simple single-page Word document that has 8 questions for you to fill out. We'll go over in a second. And then right below, it will have all of the researchers listed. So in this case, we have only one researcher. And oh, look, they didn't complete their training. But we'll just remind you to make sure that all of your research staff are up to date and that they don't have passed their deadline for city training. So that's all that's required. The one thing absent here that I think most of you will be very excited to see, there is no requirement to submit a newly signed conflict of interest form or disclosure form here. So again, if you have a progress report, you do not need to collect the signatures and put them all, including your department or chair or dean's signature on those forms each year. The initial conflict disclosure form for every individual that's submitted in your initial application or during modifications when you're adding staff, that is sufficient for progress reports moving forward. So just one simple thing. You select progress report, you fill out your progress report here and upload it, and then you make sure that everybody's training is up to date, and you click finish and then submit to the IRB for review. Simple as that. And again, just to make it even more clear how simple it is, this is the progress report form. And again, as promised, only 8 simple questions here. These first 2 questions basically are just confirming that you're on the right step. If your research has been completed and you say yes here, you don't need to fill this out. You just instead need to make a final report to close out your study. Same thing here for if data was collected. Please note, though, this actually is going to be updated a little bit. This is an outdated version of the form. The skipping to a final report will not occur until January of 2019. We haven't yet. This is another stipulation of the final rule that has not come into place yet. So if you still are in the data analysis phase, please be sure to fill out this form and submit as a progress report. And then questions 3 through 8 are very simple questions regarding your study. How many subjects were enrolled? How many were approved for your study? Whether or not you had consent, or if you had waived consent for your expedited study, and just reminders if you have any changes to make sure to submit a modification, or if there were any issues to submit a reportable event. And then finally, we just ask for an expected end date so we can kind of keep track of when you anticipate your study might be done, and any date can be allowed here. So if you anticipate on your study going another 3 years, that's perfectly fine. Just let us know. And then again, every calendar year, you'll have to resubmit the same progress report again. So that's it for progress reports. Very simple, and hopefully will make everybody's lives just that much easier here at Rowan. All right, so switching gears, we're now going to talk about our upcoming pedagogy and methodological policy that will be implemented as well starting on July 1st. So a little background on this policy. This policy is intended to limit the review from the IRB's perspective for classroom-based methodological and pedagogical activities. Basically anything done that's non-research related that still might seem to be research kind of to the untrained eye. So how do we actually define what this research versus non-research is, especially when we're looking at things in the classroom or kind of in the learning setting? So these activities are not meeting a definition of research, and that definition of research is defined by the common rule in our federal regulations is going to be systematic investigation leading to generalizable knowledge. Basically, you're actually planning, implementing, carrying out a type of activity with the ultimate goal of collecting data that could be generalizable to a broader audience. Something that you can disperse out that will actually equate to some increase in knowledge or increase in understanding to a larger public. Anything that does not fit this criteria, say things that are meant to be training students to maybe eventually carry out things like collecting this generalizable knowledge, conducting research, but not explicitly actually collecting the research for generalizable purposes. This is what this policy has been designed for. So the basic idea that we have would be if you have a set of students who are planning on you're planning on teaching these students how to conduct a proper interview process or actually conducting a survey. But the whole purpose of this activity is not for the students or you as the course director to actually collect this data, but it's purely just to train these students on how to conduct this research. So any data collection is almost incidental. It's only for training and educational purposes, even though you have potential human subjects. The data being collected is coming from fellow humans, and they're going about it similarly to how you would actually be conducting research if the plan was to actually use this in a generalizable way. So any type of activity like this, where you're not necessarily collecting the data for research, but you're just incidentally collecting information from subjects with purely intending to just train these students, this is where this policy will take place. And it's to note this is very important that any data collection that will eventually be used for research. So for example, if you have a training procedure in place, you're in a course where you're training the students, but the data collected from these students in the course of training them leads to data being inputted into their thesis or any other type of investigator-initiated investigation, basically leading to things like publication or presentation or using for further research purposes. This will not fit into our policy, and just like any other type of study will require the full IRB review. So basically, if you have a student that's planning to use information collected from this purpose for a thesis, or if you're planning on using this in research projects, you still need to submit the full IRB as usual. But if it fits the criteria of non-research, it's just for training, we instead are going to be asking the following policy be followed to submit to our Office of Research so we can agree that this is not research and then provide protections for both you as the course director, your students as kind of the student learners, and for any involvement of the subjects that you are interacting with as well. But again, this is not going to be a review by the IRB. It's going to be a much more simplistic administrative review by our office. So The policy requirements for non-human subjects research, basically learning and methodological activities, are as follows. So we're going to ask the course director to submit the following to our office. First, we're requesting a letter from the course director, basically with identifying information, what the course is and where the activities will take place in this course. If you're going to any outside locations, like say at high schools or middle schools, something like that, where you're recruiting outside or even within what locations in Rowan as well. 2, the letter will state that the course director will assume responsibility for all activity conducted. Basically, a statement that the course director understands if there's any potential risks, well, hopefully no risks, but any kind of other responsibilities for, say, the activities of all of the student learners that are being trained. 3, the course director will require students or, the student learners or the course director training the students conjunctively to obtain parental permission if relevant for minors, or adult permission or consent for those that are over 18 that are engaged in this activity. So basically, we're treating this as research, but not labeling it research. We still want everyone to be giving permission to be involved in this type of activity. So we're not really calling this consent, we're calling this permission, and we have actually developed a simplified template that will outline the language requested for this type of permission to be signed and given by all of the subjects involved. We've developed these, and I'll show you these in a second. They're also already currently on our website, but these permission forms, updated with your specific information, will then be submitted to the Office of Research along with the course syllabus that can kind of outline the actual pedagogical activities that might be occurring through this course. 4th, we're going to be asking the course director to obtain approval from the authorities of the locations involved. So basically, if you're going to a school, just like with the IRB, we want to make sure that you are allowed to be going to that school to be interacting with their students. We want to sign documentation from the school board, the district, or whoever authority figure within that location can provide. If the locations are only in Rowan, we also would request that you have approval from your dean or a designee, indicating that your department and your school actually understands this type of non-human subject research, this kind of activity that's going on, and what's involved with it before our office can grant approval. And then finally, we're also asking for all faculty involved and students involved in this type of pedagogical and methodological activities and training to complete the City Group 3 training and forward those records to the Office of Research Compliance. So the rationale for this and why our subcommittees and our IRBs made this determination is that we want to make sure all people involved in this type of activities understand the threshold between what is research and what is not research. Because there very much could be a position where they are collecting this information and going about this kind of in this training procedure and realize or don't realize that they've all of a sudden turned it into research, which would have required IRB approval. So we want them to be educated in where that line is so they know not to cross it and fall into accidentally collecting research that would be out of compliance without an IRB actual approved protocol. So the good news is we try and make your life as easy as possible here. So we've developed a template that basically covers all of the requirements of our policy 1 through 4 or 1 through 5, and this specifically basically covers these first 3. So this template, which is a single page long, which you can upload directly into EIRB when you're submitting this kind of methodological and pedagogical non-research to our office, which I'll show you how to do that in a second. It will cover just about all of the information we're requesting. That will give you the name of the project or the course, who you are as the course director, a very simplified definition of what the activities are, where the location, where the planned activities will take place, and just a reminder to upload those approval letters if it's outside of Rowan, and a letter from the dean if it's within. And then finally, a statement of responsibility indicating that the course director is assuming the full responsibility of the project and understands the definition of what human subject research is and is not, and that this is indeed non-human subjects research. We also remind you to make sure to upload things like the permission forms for the participants or the legal guardians of those participants to sign, permission letters from the school or the college dean, and the course syllabus along with city training records. Okay, so to make this simplistic, actually before we get into that, here's the example of the permission form template. So this is actually very similar to the action research template that we have for action research for our College of Education projects. It's very similar, but instead of having any indication of research, we've changed it to indicate the activities that the subject or the parental guardian of the subject is agreeing to is not research, but only for training and methodological purposes. But other than that, it just includes all of the information that we think is relevant to make sure you inform of your subjects or parental guardians of the subjects of what actually this activity is entailing. And then they are allowed to sign an agreement that they are giving permission for the minor to participate or for themselves to participate. And then finally, so to actually submit this to our office, we're going to use our EIRB system because it's the simplistic and easiest way to have record keeping and record storage of all of this as well, both for you as a researcher and for us as an administration. But we're going to make it very simplified and streamlined. So you will only need to submit within EIRB basically the first page, which we're not showing here, that will be updated. So in section 1.0, subsection 1, if you guys remember, if you want to look on your own, the options are, research or facilitated research or a couple of other options that are very rarely used. And we're going to be adding a final selection that will be pedagogical and methodological research or activities. You will select that last section in subsection 1.0 of section 1 to indicate that this is the pedagogical and methodological activity. You'll fill out all of the students involved in section 6.0 or 7.0, along with yourself as the PI, as the course director. And then once you finish section 1, it will show you section 1.2, where all of the training records will be for all of your city training for your students and yourself. And that will jump straight to section 15 here. And that's where you will be asked to upload the pedagogical template we had, any permission forms that you used from our templates, the approval letters from, say, the locations or the dean, and the course syllabus as well. So basically you indicate who you are, and then you upload those documents in section 15, and you click submit to have it be reviewed by our administration. So that's that. So that is our pedagogy policy as well. Okay. So that basically covers my presentation. And at the end of every presentation I give, I have to give out my simple errors and omissions that I see in most of my studies. So I'll leave this up here for a second and go through some of the big ones. Like in section 4.0 of our EIRB, make sure to select yes to indicate any indirect costs. And then 4.1, just indicate department funded, even if you don't have a grant funding your research. In the protocol document that you upload in section 7, in subsection 3.1 of the actual document, for duration of study, we asked both the length of the study, how long it's going to take in months or years, and the individual time it would take for a single subject to complete portions of your study. So say the length of a survey, the length of an interview, or the length of intervention. That's what we're asking for there as well. Make sure to upload everything in section 7. Especially for things like exempts. If you have recruitment documentation, alternate consent forms for exempt studies, make sure those are uploaded in section 7 as well. And make sure you have that version date in the footer and Rowan letterhead or logo if possible on the top of that first page of each document. For section 13.2 in the consent forms for expedited, make sure if you are recording your subjects in your expedited category 7 that you use that audio video addendum found in our consent form templates. And for those of you who may not have principal investigators be the data steward, make sure to note that the data steward is storing that research data at Rowan. They can be storing that on the shared drive as well. And as always, if you're using an online survey, make sure to administer it via Qualtrics. And a final note, something to always keep an eye out on, there's a quick and easy way in your main page for your study to quickly find out where your study is and whether or not it's required to have your attention and maybe something you need to do. You need to clarify and submit changes or make those changes or ask questions toward the IRB. And that's going to be either here. So in this kind of broken image here, we have magnified up here. If the blue is highlighting anything down on the bottom, anything that says clarifications requested or clarifications required, that is on the researcher side. So if you see any dark blue highlighted down here, that means it's on your end, and you require to do something, either responding to a comment or making sure to make an update, and then clicking the submit or resubmit to send it back to the IRB. There's another place to look as well. On this top left corner right here in current state, I have highlighted here either pre-submission, IRB review clarifications required, or revisions pending. All three of those are the current states that indicate that it is on the researcher side, that it requires attention by the research team, specifically the PI or the co-I, if it's already been submitted. So if you see these things, or if you see anything down here on the bottom, there's something you need to do. So you can check reviewer notes down here in one of the tabs hidden here, or just kind of look at the activity and see, oh, there's been reviewer comments that we need to respond to. Once you respond to them, make sure to click that resubmit button to send it back to the IRB. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. Again, if you have any questions, and you're obviously not talking to me right now, you can always shoot me an email or give me a phone call. My email is lens@rowan.edu, and my office number will be 856-256-4567. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck submitting your studies. Cheers.